Businesses are complex and getting more and more complex all the time. Human beings are also really complex. So when you put the two things together, it really increases that complexity. Now, if you bring in the discomfort that change creates, the whole thing starts to get, or potentially gets, really, really messy. Now, the speaker's role in this situation is to reduce the sense of risk, because the complexity of business, the complexity of humans, the discomfort of change, it really amps up that sense of risk that we feel in this coming change. So the speaker's responsibility, the leader's responsibility, is to really damp down that sense of risk. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the things that you need to do to speed up in your presentations and to slow down in your presentations in order that these really complex messages land with your audience in exactly the right kind of way. Now, we're going to be talking about the technical things that you need to slow down and speed up, but the delivery aspect of it is really, really important. That sense of executive or leadership presence. Now, if that's something you're really interested in finding out more about, then you should probably come and join us in our masterclass. We are holding a masterclass on executive or leadership presence from the 12th to the 14th of March. And we're going to spend an hour a day over 3 days. And we're going to do a really, really deep dive into what leadership presence is, looking at what we call the 3 pillars of leadership. And when you come out from that program, that training, you'll have an amazing heat map, which will show you where you're already doing brilliantly and where you really need to up the ante in your leadership game. So come and join us. We'll drop a link below, and we'd love to see you at that masterclass. Okay, so back to what we need to do when we've got these really complex messages to deliver to our audience. In essence, knowledge is an absolute curse. Now, if you are part of that complex message, if you're part of that program, that training, whatever it might be, that transformation that's happening in your organization, you're going to be super familiar with everything. You understand the context, you understand the larger, the bigger picture. So you know an awful lot. Now, knowing a lot and being very familiar with it tends to breed contempt. And what I often see with speakers who are having to deliver the same kind of content over and over again to different stakeholders within an organization or even beyond the organization is that the repetition makes it all a little bit too familiar. And so what happens is they speed up their delivery. They tend to use way too much jargon because they're super familiar with it. It all makes sense to them. They don't contextualize what's going on. And so it can sound like they don't really care and it doesn't really sell it to their audience. Or it can sound a bit condescending. It's like, really, guys, come on, keep up. This is just so straightforward and so easy. In either of those scenarios, it's not great because it's not going to land with your audience, which means it's a colossal waste of time for the people in the room, a waste of time for you. It usually means you're going to end up at your Q&A with no questions or a gazillion questions of things you think you've just explained to them. And it becomes frustrating for everybody involved. So the thing to remember is that complex ideas, emotional ideas, abstract ideas require both space and time for your audience to absorb it and then assimilate it. So absorb it by just listening, hearing, understanding what you've said, processing the words, and then assimilating it, as in bringing it into their schema, their understanding of how their world, their department, their team, their process interacts with what you are now talking about. And if we don't give people that space and that time to do that, like I say, we end up in a Q&A with literally tumbleweed or a gazillion questions that we feel we've already answered. So technically, what do you need to do? Well, there's 3 things you need to decrease the pace of when you are delivering a complex idea. So number 1 is you've got to decrease the pace of delivery. So literally the rate with which you speak. So it needs to slow right down. Not all of it, and it's not to become monotonous, but the really complex bits, that needs to be slowed right down just to allow your audience to really absorb and assimilate the content that you are delivering. The next thing that needs to slow down is the rate of new ideas. So when we're super familiar with a concept or an idea or a process, we can talk about those ideas really, really quickly because we already have the understanding. When you're unfamiliar with these things, you've got to slow the rate of those ideas and that idea progression right down. So we're creating a really firm foundation, and then we're building on top of that, and then we're building on top of that. We're not just chucking everything at them in one go. Now, it sounds really obvious, but actually the number of times I see this not happening, you'd be amazed. And then in relationship to that, the rate of new terms. So the rate that you talk about new ideas or new acronyms or any of those kind of things, that really, really needs to slow right down so that people can, again, just absorb what is being said. Now, there's one thing when you're presenting this kind of complex idea, that needs to speed up. It has to occur with much, much more frequency. So it's not all about slowing it down. There's one element that really has to go quite a bit faster, and that is the rate of questions. So the rate at which you present questions to your audience really has to increase significantly. So does this make sense to you? How does this fit with your understanding of? How do you see this happening? What would be better if this happened or that happened? So you're really getting your audience to interact with your ideas and your material. Now, the reason we want to do this is a couple of folds. One, it acts like a fire break. So you are artificially creating additional space for your audience to absorb the information. So it's not just one idea, next idea, next idea. You're creating a fire break to allow them to do that. And asking the questions, even if they're rhetorical ones, even if you're not expecting them to actually physically answer, what you're doing is getting them to interact with the material and think about what that means for them and how that would impact on their team or their organization or their part of the process. And in doing so, they begin to really genuinely assimilate the content, not just absorb it. And so it sits in this sort of superficial space, but really genuinely assimilate it. Now, if you can slow down the pace of delivery, slow down the pace of ideas, slow down the introduction of new terms, and increase the rate of questions, what's going to happen when you get to your Q&A is the very opposite of tumbleweed. You're going to have really high quality interaction and communication. And that just helps to move the conversation along to the next stage and or clear up any misunderstandings, because it doesn't matter how slowly you go. It doesn't matter how carefully you introduce new ideas. There will be some misunderstanding. And so Q&A is a perfect time to be able to clear this up. If you don't get any questions, you can't clear up misunderstandings. And that's when the group goes away and then misunderstandings and misinformation proliferate. And then you've got to work really hard to undo all of that hearsay, which isn't necessarily true. So now that was about the delivery of the message, but when you actually deliver it, you are really important in that message, how you deliver it. So you need to have real awareness of yourself. So making sure that your body and your voice narrative are congruent with the message that you're delivering. Having real connection to your message. So really believing in what it is that you're talking about and that being vocally available to your audience. And then having real awareness of your audience. Where are they? What are they struggling with? Why might this not make sense to them? What objections might they have? And really thinking about where they are in terms of this entire process. You know, if you can be present to and available for all of those things whilst you're delivering your complex message, then you are demonstrating real executive presence. And that is going to make that message land so much more consistently with your audience. So, like I said, if you are interested in learning more about how you can develop executive or leadership presence, then come and join us in that masterclass. The link is down below. So I hope today's session was really helpful for you, and I'll see you in that masterclass. Bye for now.